Why do they come? I asked a black minister in Philadelphia. Well, they're treated more like men up here in the North, he said. That's the secret of it. There's prejudice here, too, but the color line isn't drawn in their faces at every turn as it is in the South. It all gets back to a question of manhood. Race standard baking, following the color line. Whitfield, Mississippi, February 7th, 1958. It would become legend in Chicago about the migrants and their children, the lengths to which some blacks people would go to get out of the South. The Great Migration was now in its fourth decade. And back in Mississippi, people were still trying to escape. One of the most desperate souls was a perfectly well man named Arrington High, who had been consigned to the Mississippi State Hospital for the insane for protesting the Southern order of things. The hospital and its 100 or so outbuildings, originally called the Mississippi Lunatic Asylum, took up some 3,000 isolated acres in the pine woods south of Jackson, near Terrapin Skin Creek, in a place called Whitfield. From the time that it opened in 1935, anyone saying they took him to Whitfield meant nobody ever expected to see the person again. What got Arrington High into trouble was a weekly newsletter he published that argued for integration. He'd been editor of a two-piece mimeographed broadside, The Eagle Eye, for more than 14 years, and had made a name for himself for protesting the treatment of black people in central Mississippi. What got him declared insane, however, was exposing the segregationalists who were consorting with prostitutes at a black brothel that catered only to white politicians. It was a death wish of a crusade that actually may have fit the legal definition of insanity for a black man in Mississippi at that time. I was taken into custody and committed to the insane asylum in October 1957. It was a sentence that would shut him off at the age of 47 from the rest of the world and his wife and his 4 children for the remainder of his life. He was held in confinement deep in the woods, surrounded by guards and hospital personnel, a good 15 miles from the nearest city. It amounted to a total silencing of a revered dissident of the Mississippi order of things and a slow death in a crazy place where he'd be subjected to whatever indignities the staff designed. The world of Mississippi and the world of Chicago were intertwined and interdependent. And what happened in one did not easily escape the notice of the other from afar. A black physician, a man named T.R.M. Howard, made note of what happened to Arrington High. Dr. Howard had founded a regional council in Mississippi, a local precursor to the civil rights organizations that would become household names in the 1960s. He organized protests from his base in the all-black town of Mound Bayou in the delta of Mississippi. But his activities forced him to leave Mississippi a few years before Arrington High was committed to the asylum. From Chicago, Dr. Howard tried to figure out a way to help his friend. The asylum put patients to work in the dairy and truck farms and the orchards run by the state. Some of the patients had to be up at dawn to work the farms. Arrington High got up at 5 a.m. on February 7th, 1958, a Friday, to milk cows, which was one of his chores. It was still dark outside, and instead of heading to the pasture, he scurried down a deserted path on the hospital grounds and came upon a row of 5 cars that were parked on the side of a quiet stretch of road. A door in the second car opened, and he got inside the only car with a black driver. That car and the 4 other cars, driven by white men, inched their way to the exit so not as to kick up any more dust or engine noise. There, the white man driving the lead car of the caravan motioned to the hospital guard at the front gate. The guard waved the processional through with a tilt of his flashlight. Arrington High was out of the asylum, but he wasn't out of danger. The motorcade took to the highway, careful not to drive too fast or too slow to attract attention. They drove 105 miles through Pelahatchie, Hickory, Meridian, and Tussuma, Mississippi, to the Alabama line. It would take them more than 2 hours to get there. and they had to watch for cars tailing them and sheriffs hunting them, as surely by now the asylum officials knew that High had gone missing. At the Alabama line, the drivers took no chances. They didn't cross the state border themselves with their Mississippi license plates. Instead, they took Arrington High to the state line and instructed him to get out of the car and walk over into Alabama. There, a caravan of 5 other cars, all with Alabama license plates, were waiting for him. As before, there were 4 white drivers and 1 black driver. The caravan would attract less attention if 2 black men were driving together than it would if Arrington High were riding with a white man. He was in Alabama, but he still wasn't safe. He was still in the South and within the siren call of any Mississippi sheriff. The cars took him to a predetermined location. There waiting for him was a pine coffin. He was told to get inside. The coffin had breathing holes in it for him to get air. The men sealed him in the coffin and loaded it onto a hearse. On top of the coffin, the men placed a load of flowers, so it would appear that the coffin had just been driven from a funeral. The hearse drove to a railroad station where the coffin was loaded onto a train bound for Chicago. He lay still and quiet, unable to turn over or adjust himself for the 15-hour ride to the north. The moment the train pulled out of the station in Alabama, bearing Arrington High's coffin, Dr. Howard, awaiting word in Chicago, got a long-distance phone call. "The Eagle has flown the coop," the voice on the line told him. The train bearing Arrington High's coffin arrived at the 12th Street station in Chicago. Dr. Howard, the friend who had helped organize the escape, met the train at the station that had come to symbolize the Great Migration itself. The coffin would now have to be transported by a hearse to another funeral home. There, a group of men opened the lid and welcomed Arrington High to the receiving city of Chicago. The people were joyful. How many people fled the South this way during the Great Migration is impossible to know, due to the very nature of the mission. For the operation to work, it required the highest level of security, coordination, and planning worthy of the Secret Service, the active and willing participation of sympathetic white Southerners, the cooperation of funeral home directors, both in the departing state and in the receiving state, the complete trust of the person being ferried out by friends and loved ones willing to put themselves in danger to save a single soul, and a good measure of courage and faith on everyone's part. It would appear from the precision of the Arrington High escape that this was not the first time that people involved in this execution had carried out an operation such as this. To this day, many funeral directors refuse to discuss the matter, admit their involvement, or bring unwanted attention to it, in case it would seem it might need to be used again. That underground is as effective today in the South, Arrington High told the Chicago Defender, a local newspaper, after his arrival, as it was during the days of slavery. It was Dr. Howard who, with the help of more than a dozen other men, arranged for his colleague's escape and greeted him upon arrival. He knew what it meant to flee for your life. He did not have to imagine what Arrington High had been through during that dark, cramped ride to Chicago. Dr. Howard himself had to be spirited from Mississippi only a few years before. Mr. Toastmaster.